The words cut through the ambient noise of Denver International Airport's premium terminal like a blade through silk. Serena Vargas stood with her arms crossed, her Skylink Airlines supervisor badge catching the afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her voice carried enough authority to turn heads throughout the marble-floored space where leather armchairs clustered around polished oak tables and the carpet beneath bore patterns that whispered of exclusivity and privilege. She was staring down at a black man seated calmly in one of those leather chairs, his athletic frame relaxed despite the confrontation brewing around him. He wore gray Nike running shorts that still showed faint salt stains from dried sweat, a moisture-wicking blue shirt that clung to his muscular torso, and white running shoes bearing the honest scars of a full marathon through Denver streets. Around his neck hung a finisher's medal from that morning's Denver Marathon, the ribbons slightly frayed from where it had rubbed against his shirt during the final grueling miles. The man looked up at Serena with eyes that held no anger, no defensiveness, just a calm steadiness that seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst might have. His hands remained folded in his lap, his breathing even, his posture suggesting someone accustomed to being challenged, yet equally accustomed to standing his ground. "I have a confirmed first-class ticket," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled authority that comes from years of leadership. "Flight 447 to Atlanta, seat 2A. Serena's expression hardened. She had worked for Skylink Airlines for years, climbing from gate agent to terminal supervisor through what she considered unwavering dedication to company standards and passenger security. She prided herself on maintaining the premium terminal's exclusive atmosphere, ensuring that paying first-class passengers received the elevated experience they had purchased. To her, that meant keeping out anyone who didn't meet her personal standards of what first-class passengers should look like. "Let me see that ticket," she demanded, extending her hand with the expectation of immediate compliance. The man reached into a simple black duffel bag and produced a boarding pass. Serena examined it with the intensity of a jeweler studying a suspicious diamond. The ticket was legitimate. She could see that immediately. Flight 447, Seat 2A, First Class. But legitimacy wasn't the issue for Serena. The issue was appropriateness. "This could be fake," she announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We've had problems with people using stolen credit cards to book flights they can't afford." Derek Langston appeared at Serena's shoulder like a shadow summoned by conflict. He was a large man with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of presence that suggested he had once served in law enforcement. His uniform was crisp, his posture military straight, and his expression carried the skeptical alertness of someone who assumed trouble until proven otherwise. "Problem here?" Derek asked, his gaze fixed on the man in running clothes. "This gentleman seems confused about which terminal he belongs in," Serena replied, her tone suggesting that confusion was a generous interpretation of the situation. The man in the chair remained motionless. "I'm exactly where I belong," he said evenly. "In the seat I paid for, in the terminal my ticket grants me access to." Derek studied him with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to sizing up potential problems. What he saw was a black man in athletic wear carrying a gym bag in a space designed for business suits and designer handbags. The mathematics of the situation seemed simple enough to Derek. "Sir, we're going to need to see multiple forms of identification and verify your booking through our computer network," Derek said, his voice carrying the weight of official procedure. "We have protocols for situations like this." "Situations like what?" the man asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Around them, the premium terminal hummed with the usual Sunday afternoon energy. Business travelers clutched laptops and spoke in hushed tones about quarterly reports and client meetings. Wealthy families supervised children who had never known the chaos of general airport seating. The air carried the scent of expensive coffee from the premium cafe and the subtle fragrance of leather conditioning oil from the furniture. But now that normal energy was shifting, focusing as other passengers began to notice the confrontation developing in their exclusive space. Conversations grew quieter as people strained to listen without appearing to eavesdrop. Some pretended to read magazines while their attention fixed on the drama unfolding just a few seats away. Near gate B47, Sawyer Montgomery looked up from his laptop where he had been editing video content for his social media channels. He was a college sophomore at the University of Colorado, majoring in communications with a focus on digital journalism. He had grown up understanding the power of social media to document and amplify injustice, and something about the scene developing across the terminal triggered his instincts for recognizing a story worth telling. Sawyer was white with sandy brown hair and the kind of earnest expression that made people trust him with their stories. He wore jeans and a Colorado Buffalo sweatshirt, and his backpack contained the tools of his trade. A high-end smartphone with professional camera capabilities, portable battery packs, and editing software that could process and upload content within minutes of recording. He had watched the interaction begin and had immediately sensed that what he was seeing was more than a simple boarding pass verification. The body language of all involved, the tone of the conversation, the assumptions being made, it all felt disturbingly familiar from countless viral videos he had seen documenting similar confrontations. Sawyer quietly activated his phone's camera app and began recording, making sure the device was positioned to capture both audio and video without being obvious about his documentation. He had learned from his journalism professors that sometimes the most important stories were the ones that happened when people thought no one was watching. Dr. Abigail Kensington sat in a chair 20 feet away, pretending to review patient files on her tablet, while actually listening to every word of the confrontation. She was a successful cardiologist returning to Atlanta after presenting research at a medical conference in Denver. She was white, with graying brown hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a navy blue business suit that spoke of both competence and success. Doctor? Kensington had grown up in the South during the 1980s and 1990s, and while she considered herself progressive and enlightened, she had also learned to avoid confrontations that might make her uncomfortable. She recognized what was happening as wrong, but she struggled with the social dynamics of intervening in a situation that didn't directly involve her. Behind the gate counter for Flight 447, Natalia Rivera was processing passenger upgrades when she noticed the commotion developing in the seating area. She had been working for Skylink Airlines for several years, starting as a baggage handler and working her way up to gate agent through night school and determination that impressed her supervisors. Natalia was Hispanic with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a ponytail during work hours and brown eyes that missed very little of what happened in her assigned gate area. She took pride in treating every passenger with respect and professionalism, regardless of their appearance or perceived social status. She had grown up in a family where hard work was respected regardless of the clothes it required, and she had learned to judge people by their actions rather than their appearances. What she was watching made her deeply uncomfortable. She could see Kendrick Vale's boarding pass from her position. It was legitimate, properly processed, and indicated a passenger who had paid full price for the first-class service. What she could also see was that he was being treated differently than any white passenger would be treated under similar circumstances. Natalia began quietly documenting the interaction, not through recording, but by noting names, times, and specific statements in the incident log that gate agents were required to maintain for any passenger service issues. She had a feeling that this particular incident was going to require very detailed documentation. The man in the running clothes, Kendrick Vale, though none of the confronting staff had bothered to ask his name, remained seated with the kind of composure that comes from years of facing adversity without losing one's dignity. Kendrick had learned that anger, no matter how justified, often gave other people permission to dismiss both him and his concerns. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with the lean, powerful build of a serious recreational athlete. His marathon training had been both physical preparation and mental discipline, a way of processing the stress and responsibility that came with leading a major corporation while maintaining the clarity of thought necessary for making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. The medal hanging around his neck represented more than just athletic achievement. He had finished the Denver Marathon, placing him in the top 15% of his age group. But more importantly, he had run those miles in memory of his father, who had passed away the previous year after a battle with cancer. His father, Reginald Vale, had built Vale Global Logistics from a single delivery truck, purchased with a loan secured against the family home in 1987. What started as a local courier service had grown into a nationwide operation with billions in annual revenue and thousands of employees across dozens of states and logistics contracts with every major airline, including a substantial annual agreement with Skylink Airlines. Kendrick had spent his entire adult life preparing to lead the company his father had built. He had earned an MBA from Wharton, worked in every department of Vale Global Logistics, from loading docks to executive boardrooms, and had traveled to military bases, corporate headquarters, and distribution centers to understand every aspect of the business that now employed thousands of families. His personal net worth approached hundreds of millions, largely tied to his ownership stake in Vale Global Logistics and his diversified investment portfolio. He owned homes in Atlanta, Denver, and Martha's Vineyard, drove a collection of luxury cars, and traveled frequently on the company's private jet, a Bombardier Global 7500 that was currently parked at Denver International Airport, waiting for his decision about whether commercial or private travel would better serve his schedule. But none of that mattered to Serena Vargas or Derek Langston. What mattered to them was that he was a black man in running clothes, carrying a gym bag in a space they believed was reserved for people who looked different, dressed differently, and carried themselves with the kind of obvious wealth that required no investigation. "Sir," Derek continued, his voice taking on the official tone he used when he wanted to establish his authority. "We're going to need you to come with us to verify your identity and your right to be in this terminal." Kendrick looked up at Derek with the same steady calm he had shown Serena. "Officer Langston," he said, reading Derek's name tag, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're asking me to do. I want you to consider whether you would make the same request of anyone else sitting in this terminal with a valid boarding pass." Derek's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to having his authority questioned, especially not by someone he viewed as a potential security risk. "Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate with our security procedures." "I am cooperating," Kendrick replied. "I'm sitting in my assigned area, waiting for my flight, exactly like every other passenger in this terminal. The difference is that none of them are being asked to prove they belong here." Serena stepped closer, her voice rising slightly. "The difference is that none of them are dressed inappropriately for a premium terminal environment." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Around the terminal, conversation stopped completely as passengers realized they were witnessing something significant. Sawyer Montgomery adjusted his phone to ensure he was capturing both video and audio clearly. Dr. Abigail Kensington looked up from her tablet with undisguised concern. Natalia Rivera felt her stomach tighten as she recognized that the confrontation was escalating beyond any reasonable passenger service interaction. Kendrick remained seated, but something in his expression shifted. not toward anger, but toward a kind of resolved awareness that this moment was going to define something much larger than a simple travel inconvenience. "Serena," he said quietly, "I want you to repeat what you just said. I want you to state clearly for everyone here to understand what you believe is inappropriate about my appearance." Serena hesitated for the first time, sensing that she might be approaching dangerous territory, but unable to back down without losing face in front of her colleague and the watching passengers. "I said that you're dressed inappropriately for a premium terminal environment," she repeated, though with less conviction than before. "And what specifically makes my appearance inappropriate?" Kendrick asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of decades of assumptions, prejudices, and unexamined beliefs about who belonged in exclusive spaces and who did not. It demanded an honest answer to a question that most people preferred to leave unasked and unanswered. Derek shifted uncomfortably, beginning to sense that the situation was developing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Serena looked around the terminal, suddenly aware that every eye was focused on her, waiting for her response to a question that would either justify her actions or reveal them for what they really were. Serena's face flushed as she realized the trap Kendrick had laid with his simple question. She couldn't explicitly state that his race was the issue. That would be legally problematic and career-ending. But she also couldn't back down without admitting that her entire approach had been wrong. So she chose the most dangerous path available, doubling down on her assumptions while trying to make them sound like legitimate security concerns. "Let me be absolutely clear," Serena said, her voice carrying across the terminal with forced authority. "I've seen this type of situation before. People buy tickets with stolen credit cards, or they use points they shouldn't have access to, and then they try to access premium services they can't legitimately afford." She gestured toward Kendrick with obvious disdain. "Look at yourself. You're sweaty in gym clothes carrying a gym bag. This isn't Planet Fitness. This is a first-class terminal." Derek Langston stepped forward, emboldened by Serena's aggressive stance. "Sir, we're going to need to call airport police to verify your identity and investigate possible fraud. We have zero tolerance for passengers who attempt to access services through deceptive means." Kendrick felt something shift inside him. Not anger, but a cold, clear recognition of exactly what was happening and exactly what it was going to cost the people standing in front of him. He had faced discrimination before, but rarely had it been so blatant, so public, and so thoroughly documented by witnesses. "Officer Langston," Kendrick said, his voice remaining perfectly calm, "I want you to state clearly what specific evidence you have that I obtained my ticket through fraudulent means." Derek's training had not prepared him for a suspect who asked direct questions about evidence and procedure. Most people in Kendrick's position either became angry, which justified escalation, or became compliant, which justified their removal. Kendrick was doing neither, and Derek found himself improvising responses he wasn't qualified to make. "Well, sir, there are several indicators," Derek began, though he hadn't actually identified any specific indicators beyond his own assumptions. "The way you're dressed, the fact that you don't have proper luggage for first-class travel, and your reluctance to provide additional identification all suggest potential fraud." Sawyer Montgomery, still recording from his position across the terminal, whispered into his phone for the benefit of his live stream audience, which had grown rapidly in the past minutes. "This is absolutely insane, guys. They're literally profiling this marathon runner because he's black and wearing athletic clothes. This is happening right now at Denver International Airport." The live stream comments began flooding in, faster than Sawyer could read them. Outrage, support, demands for action. "And this is disgusting. Someone call the news. Get this man's name. Record everything. I'm sharing this everywhere. This is why I don't fly." Dr. Abigail Kensington finally stood up from her chair, unable to remain a passive observer any longer. Her medical training had taught her to recognize patterns and symptoms, and what she was witnessing had all the symptoms of racial profiling. "Excuse me," Dr. Kensington said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in crisis situations. "I'm Dr. Abigail Kensington, and I've been watching this entire interaction. This gentleman has done absolutely nothing wrong. He's sitting quietly in a seat he has every right to occupy, and you're treating him like a criminal based on nothing but your own assumptions." Serena turned toward Dr. Kensington with obvious irritation. "Ma'am, this is a security matter, and we don't need passengers interfering with our procedures." "These aren't procedures," Dr. Kensington replied firmly. "This is harassment. I've been sitting here and I've watched you process dozens of passengers without asking anyone else for additional identification or questioning anyone else's right to be here." Derek attempted to regain control of the situation. "Doctor, we appreciate your concern, but we're trained security professionals and we need to follow established protocols for potentially suspicious activity. Show me the protocol that defines suspicious activity as running a marathon and wearing athletic clothes afterward," Dr. Kensington challenged. Natalia Rivera could no longer remain silent behind her gate counter. She had processed thousands of passengers without ever seeing anyone treated the way Kendrick Vale was being treated. Her training had emphasized customer service, respect, and professionalism, and nothing she was witnessing aligned with those values. "Serena!" Natalia called out, stepping away from her counter. "His boarding pass is legitimate. I processed it myself. He paid full price for his ticket, and he has every right to be here." Serena whirled toward Natalia with fury in her eyes. "You need to stay at your counter and do your job." "This involves all of us when we're discriminating against passengers," Natalia replied, her voice shaking slightly but her conviction clear. "This is wrong, and everyone here knows it." Kendrick remained seated throughout the escalating confrontation, watching as more and more people were drawn into a situation that revealed the fault lines of assumption, privilege, and prejudice that typically remained hidden beneath the surface of polite society. He had learned over the years that these moments were tests, not just of his own character, but of the character of everyone around him. A businessman in an expensive suit who had been pretending to read emails looked up and addressed Derek directly. "Officer, I've been traveling first class for years, and I've never seen anyone treated like this. What exactly has this man done wrong?" Derek found himself surrounded by questioning voices and challenging stares. His authority, which had seemed absolute just minutes earlier, was being undermined by passengers who refused to accept his assumptions as legitimate security concerns. "Sir," Derek said to the businessman, "we have protocols for dealing with suspicious individuals, and we need passengers to allow us to do our jobs." "But what makes him suspicious?" the businessman pressed. "I'm wearing jeans and a golf shirt. My luggage is smaller than his. My boarding pass looks identical to his. Why isn't my presence suspicious?" Derek couldn't answer the question honestly without admitting that race was the determining factor, and he couldn't answer it dishonestly without revealing the weakness of his position to everyone listening. Sawyer Montgomery continued narrating for his live stream, which had now grown dramatically. "The airline staff can't explain what this man has done wrong. They can't explain why he's being treated differently than everyone else. They're just demanding that he prove he belongs somewhere he clearly has every right to be." The comments on Sawyer's stream had become a torrent of outrage and support. "Someone find out this man's name. Call the ACLU? This is going viral. I'm never flying Skylink again. Airport security is out of control. Document everything." Kendrick checked his phone and saw several missed calls from his assistant, Ariana Reyes, who monitored social media mentions of Vale Global Logistics and had undoubtedly seen Sawyer's live stream or others like it. He also saw a text message from Captain Donovan Hayes, the pilot of his company's private jet, asking if he needed alternative transportation arrangements. Kendrick typed a quick response to Captain Donovan Hayes. "Stand by. Situation developing. May need pickup soon." Serena saw Kendrick using his phone and immediately became suspicious. "Sir, who are you texting? Are you coordinating with others to create a disturbance?" The accusation was so absurd that several passengers laughed out loud. Kendrick looked up at Serena with something approaching pity. "Serena," he said quietly, "every word you've spoken in the last while has been recorded by multiple people and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. I don't need to coordinate with anyone to create a disturbance. You're creating quite a sufficient disturbance all by yourself." Derek pulled out his radio and called for additional security backup. Officer Javier Morales, a veteran of airport police, received the call while patrolling another terminal. He had seen thousands of passenger disputes and had learned to distinguish between genuine security threats and power struggles between staff and passengers. Derek Langston's call sounded more like the latter, but procedure required him to respond. Javier Morales was Hispanic, the son of immigrants who had taught him to respect both authority and justice and to recognize the difference between the two. He had worked in law enforcement long enough to understand that some of his colleagues occasionally allowed personal biases to influence their professional judgment, and he had developed a reputation for de-escalating situations that other officers might have allowed to spiral out of control. As Javier Morales walked toward the gate, he wondered what kind of situation required backup for a single passenger who was described as uncooperative rather than violent, threatening, or dangerous. Meanwhile, Victoria Sinclair, the terminal manager, received an urgent call from her supervisor about a developing situation that was being broadcast live on social media. She had worked in airport management for years and understood that viral videos of discriminatory treatment could cost the airport millions in revenue and damage relationships with airline partners. Victoria was white with silver hair and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested competence and authority. She had built her career by solving problems before they became crises, and she recognized immediately that the situation developing at Gate B47 had already moved beyond the problem stage and was rapidly approaching crisis level. Victoria hurried toward the premium terminal, knowing that whatever she found when she arrived would likely determine whether the rest of her day would be spent implementing damage control procedures or updating her resume. Back at Gate B47, Kendrick Vale remained seated in his leather chair, surrounded by airport staff who couldn't articulate why he didn't belong there, and passengers who couldn't understand why he was being treated differently than anyone else. He had made a decision about how this situation would end, but he was allowing Serena Vargas and Derek Langston to dig their professional graves as deeply as possible before he revealed who he really was and what their assumptions were going to cost them. The Denver Marathon medal around his neck caught the afternoon light streaming through the terminal windows, a symbol of endurance, persistence, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need to announce itself to be recognized by people who understand what real achievement looks like. "Officer Langston," Kendrick said calmly, "I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to sit in this chair in this terminal until my flight boards, and I want you to decide what you're willing to do to a paying passenger who has committed no crime and violated no policy except your personal assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces." Derek looked around the terminal, suddenly aware that every eye was focused on him, that multiple phones were recording his every word and action, and that his response to Kendrick's simple statement was going to define not just the rest of his day, but potentially the rest of his career. The moment of truth was approaching, and Derek Langston was about to discover that some assumptions carry a higher cost than anyone could possibly anticipate. Sawyer Montgomery felt his phone vibrating with notifications as his live stream exploded across social media platforms. What had started as a casual documentation of airport discrimination had become something much larger, a real-time broadcast of institutional bias being challenged in front of hundreds of witnesses, both physical and digital. "Guys, this is absolutely unreal," Sawyer whispered into his phone as he adjusted the angle to capture both Kendrick and the growing circle of airline staff surrounding him. "We're now at hundreds of live viewers, and this number is climbing every second. This marathon runner is being harassed by airport security for literally sitting in a chair he paid to access." Dr. Abigail Kensington had moved closer to the confrontation. No longer content to observe from a distance, she pulled out her own phone and began recording, understanding that multiple angles of documentation might be crucial for any legal proceedings that developed from the situation. "This is Dr. Abigail Kensington," she said clearly into her phone's camera, establishing her identity for the record. "I'm a cardiologist from Atlanta, and I'm witnessing clear racial profiling at Denver International Airport. The gentleman being harassed is sitting quietly, has shown his legitimate boarding pass, and has done absolutely nothing to warrant this treatment. I want everyone watching this to understand that this man is being treated differently than every other passenger in this terminal. I've been here and no one else has been asked to provide additional identification. No one else has been questioned about their right to be here. No one else has been surrounded by security officers for sitting in a chair they paid to access." Natalia Rivera had left her gate counter entirely, drawn into the confrontation by her inability to remain silent while watching a passenger being mistreated. "Serena, this is wrong," Natalia said directly to her supervisor, her voice carrying clearly across the terminal. "Mr. Vale's ticket is legitimate. He paid full price. He has every right to be here, and you know it." Serena Martinez turned toward Natalia with fury in her eyes. "You're out of line, Rivera. Get back to your counter and stay in your lane." "My lane includes passenger service," Natalia replied, standing her ground. "And good passenger service doesn't include discriminating against people based on their appearance." Derek Langston was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the number of witnesses challenging his authority. In his experience, airport security worked best when passengers remained passive and accepted whatever determinations he made. The growing crowd of vocal supporters around Kendrick Vale was creating exactly the kind of public accountability that made abuse of authority difficult to maintain. "Everyone needs to step back and allow security personnel to do their jobs," Derek announced, his voice carrying the kind of forced authority that suggested he was losing control of the situation. "Then do your job properly," called out Grant Harrington, a businessman who had been trying to work at a nearby table but found himself unable to ignore the injustice developing in front of him. Grant was a white executive from Chicago who traveled extensively for his consulting firm. He had witnessed discrimination in airports before, but usually in subtle forms that allowed plausible deniability. What he was seeing at gate B47 was so blatant that it demanded a response from anyone with a functioning moral compass. "Sir?" Derek addressed Grant with barely controlled irritation. "I'm going to need you to return to your seat and allow us to handle this situation." "I am handling this situation," Grant replied firmly. "I'm refusing to be a silent witness to discrimination, and I'm recording everything for my own protection and his." Kendrick Vale remained seated throughout the growing confrontation, but he was no longer simply enduring the discrimination. He was strategically allowing it to escalate in front of as many witnesses as possible. Every statement from Serena and Derek was being captured by multiple cameras. Every assumption they made was being documented. Every action they took was being preserved for the accountability that was coming. Kendrick pulled out his phone and opened his text messages. His assistant, Ariana Reyes, had been monitoring social media mentions of Vale Global Logistics and had already identified Sawyer Montgomery's live stream and several other videos being shared across platforms. Ariana had texted, "Sir, are you at Denver International? There's a viral video of someone being discriminated against in Terminal B, and some viewers think it might be you." Kendrick typed back, "It's me. Situation developing. Alert Captain Donovan Hayes for possible pickup. Also alert Victor Caldwell at Skylink. He'll want to know about this before it gets worse." Victor Caldwell was the regional director for Skylink Airlines, responsible for operations across several western states. More importantly, he was the primary liaison for Vale Global Logistics' substantial annual contract with Skylink. Victor and Kendrick had developed a professional relationship over years of successful partnership, and Victor was going to be very interested to learn that his airline staff was discriminating against the CEO of one of their most valuable corporate partners. Sawyer Montgomery noticed that his live stream had reached a surging viewer count, and the engagement was unlike anything he had experienced. The comment section had become a real-time town hall meeting about race, privilege, and accountability. "Guys, I need everyone watching to understand something important," Sawyer said into his camera. "This isn't just about one man being mistreated. This is about all the times this happens when no one is recording. This is about all the people who get dismissed, excluded, and humiliated in spaces they have every right to occupy, but who don't have thousands of witnesses to support them." Sawyer's journalism professors had taught him about the responsibility that comes with documenting injustice, and he was beginning to feel the weight of that responsibility. His simple recording of airport discrimination was becoming a catalyst for broader conversations about bias, assumption, and the cost of remaining silent when witnessing unfairness. Officer Javier Morales arrived at Gate B47 and immediately assessed the situation with the experienced eye of someone who had broken up countless airport disputes. What he saw was a calm black man sitting in a chair surrounded by agitated airport staff and supported by multiple passengers who were actively documenting the interaction. Javier Morales had learned over his years in law enforcement that the person creating the disturbance was usually not the person sitting quietly while everyone else argued around them. He also noticed the expensive phones recording from multiple angles, the growing crowd of engaged passengers, and the body language that suggested this situation had already moved far beyond a simple security check. "Officer Langston," Javier Morales said quietly, approaching Derek. "What exactly is the nature of the security threat here?" Derek found himself struggling to articulate a coherent response. "We have a passenger who's refusing to provide additional identification for verification of his right to access premium terminal areas." Javier Morales looked at Kendrick, who was sitting calmly with his boarding pass visible and his hands folded in his lap. "Has he shown you his ticket?" "Yes, but we need additional verification because his appearance doesn't match typical first-class passenger profiles." Javier Morales felt his stomach tighten. In his years of law enforcement, he had learned to recognize the language people used when they were trying to justify actions they knew were wrong. Derek's explanation sounded exactly like that kind of language. "Officer Langston," Javier Morales said carefully, "what specific policy requires additional identification based on passenger appearance?" Derek realized he was being questioned by a fellow officer about the legitimacy of his actions, and his response revealed his growing desperation to justify a position that was becoming increasingly unjustifiable. "Look at him," Derek said, gesturing toward Kendrick. "Running clothes, gym bag, no business attire. This is a premium terminal. We have standards to maintain." Javier Morales looked around the terminal and immediately spotted several other passengers in casual clothing, jeans, polo shirts, sneakers, none of whom were being asked to provide additional identification or justify their presence. The discrimination was so obvious that it would be impossible to defend in any formal review. Victoria Sinclair, the terminal manager, arrived at gate B47 with the urgent awareness that whatever she found was already being broadcast live to thousands of viewers and would determine how the rest of her day unfolded. What Victoria saw when she arrived confirmed her worst fears. Multiple passengers were recording an obvious case of racial discrimination. Airport staff were making statements that could not be defended legally or ethically, and social media was already amplifying the incident beyond any hope of quiet resolution. "What is the situation here?" Victoria asked, though her tone suggested she already understood more than she wanted to admit. Serena Vargas, sensing that her supervisor's arrival might provide support for her position, spoke first. "We have a passenger who's attempting to access premium services without proper verification. His appearance suggests he may not belong in this terminal." Victoria Sinclair felt her heart sink. She had hoped that her staff might have some legitimate justification for their actions, but Serena's statement was exactly the kind of legally indefensible discrimination that cost airports millions in settlements and damaged relationships with airline partners. Kendrick Vale finally stood up from his chair, not with anger or agitation, but with the calm authority of someone who had allowed a situation to develop exactly as he had intended. At 6 feet 2 inches, his presence commanded attention, and his marathon-trained physique suggested strength that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with endurance. "Miss Sinclair," Kendrick said, reading Victoria's name tag, "I want you to understand that everything that has happened here has been recorded by multiple witnesses and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Your staff has discriminated against me based on my race and appearance, despite my having legitimate first-class tickets and having committed no violation of any airport policy." Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she realized that she was not just dealing with a passenger service issue, but with a potential legal and public relations disaster that could affect her career and the airport's relationships with major airline partners. "Sir, I apologize if there has been any misunderstanding," Victoria began, trying to find language that might de-escalate the situation without admitting legal liability. "There's been no misunderstanding," Kendrick replied firmly. "Your staff has treated me exactly as they intended to treat me. The question now is what you're going to do about it." Sawyer Montgomery adjusted his camera angle to capture Victoria Sinclair's response, knowing that his viewers were witnessing a moment of accountability that would either restore some measure of justice or reveal how deeply institutionalized discrimination could reach when it thought it wouldn't face consequences. The next few minutes would determine whether Denver International Airport would be remembered as a place where discrimination was challenged and corrected, or as a place where it was defended and perpetuated. Kendrick Vale checked his phone once more and saw a text from Captain Donovan Hayes. "Jet-fueled and ready. ETA to your gate soon if needed." Kendrick typed back, "Bring her in, Captain. I think we're going to need to make a statement." The private jet that was about to arrive would do more than provide Kendrick with alternative transportation. It was going to transform the entire dynamic of the confrontation and reveal to Serena Vargas, Derek Langston, and everyone else exactly who they had been discriminating against. But first, Kendrick was going to give them one final opportunity to demonstrate what they would do when their assumptions were directly challenged by undeniable reality. Serena Vargas felt cornered by the growing number of passengers challenging her authority, and her response revealed the dangerous intersection of prejudice and power when faced with accountability. Instead of backing down or reconsidering her position, she chose to escalate the confrontation, apparently believing that aggressive assertion of her authority would overwhelm the opposition in gathering around Kendrick Vale. "I want him removed from this terminal immediately," Serena announced to Derek Langston and Officer Javier Morales, her voice carrying across the premium lounge with unmistakable command. I don't care what he claims his status is or what ticket he says he has. Look at him. He doesn't belong here, and I'm not going to allow my paying first-class passengers to be made uncomfortable by someone who clearly doesn't understand appropriate terminal behavior. Derek Langston seized on Serena's directive as validation for his own assumptions. Sir, you need to gather your belongings and leave this terminal area immediately. You can access general airport seating, but premium facilities are restricted to appropriate passengers. Kendrick Vale remained motionless in his leather chair, but something in his expression shifted, not toward anger or frustration, but toward a kind of cold resolve that suggested the situation was about to change dramatically. Officer Langston, Kendrick said quietly, his voice carrying enough authority to cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. I want you to state clearly for all these witnesses whether you're ordering me to leave based on any violation of airport policy or whether you're ordering me to leave based on your personal assumptions about my appearance. Derek found himself trapped by the directness of the question. He couldn't admit that appearance was the determining factor without acknowledging discrimination, but he couldn't identify any legitimate policy violation because none existed. Sir, we have standards for premium facility access, and those standards include appropriate attire and behavior. Show me the dress code, Kendrick replied immediately. Show me the written policy that defines appropriate attire for this terminal. Derek looked around desperately, realizing that he had made claims about policies that didn't actually exist. Airport terminals had security policies, safety regulations, and prohibited items lists, but they didn't have dress codes for premium areas beyond basic requirements for shoes and shirts. Officer Javier Morales stepped forward, uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was heading. Officer Langston, what specific policy violation are we addressing here? Derek's response revealed the desperation of someone whose assumptions were being dismantled by direct questions. Javier, we have a passenger who's refusing to comply with security screening and causing a disturbance in a premium facility. I haven't refused anything, Kendrick interjected calmly. I've shown my ticket, offered my identification, and answered every question asked. I've been sitting quietly in a chair I paid to access. The only disturbance here is the one created by your staff's assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces. Sawyer Montgomery continued his live stream commentary for his audience, which had grown dramatically as word spread across social media platforms about the confrontation at Denver International Airport. This is absolutely incredible. The airport security can't identify any actual rule this man has broken. They can't point to any specific policy he's violated. They're demanding that he leave based purely on how he looks. And they're getting more aggressive as more people challenge their authority. The live stream comments had become a torrent of outrage and legal advice. Call the ACLU right now. Get badge numbers for everyone. This is a federal civil rights violation. Someone contact the news. I'm sharing this everywhere. His lawyer is going to be very busy. Document everything. Don't let them delete this. Dr. Abigail Kensington had positioned herself where her phone could capture both video and audio of the escalating confrontation. Her medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but her moral training as a human being was being tested by watching deliberate discrimination unfold in front of multiple witnesses. I want everyone here to understand what we're witnessing, Dr. Kensington said into her camera. These airport employees cannot articulate any legitimate reason for their treatment of this gentleman. They're demanding compliance with policies they can't define for violations they can't specify. This is discrimination, and it's happening in real time in front of all of us. Natalia Rivera had abandoned any pretense of remaining neutral in the confrontation. Serena, you need to stop this right now, Natalia said firmly, stepping directly between her supervisor and Kendrick Vale. This passenger has done nothing wrong. His ticket is legitimate. He has every right to be here. You're discriminating against him, and everyone knows it." Serena turned toward Natalia with fury in her eyes. "Rivera, you're out of line. Get back to your station, or you'll be looking for another job tomorrow. If standing up against discrimination costs me my job, then I need to find a better place to work," Natalia replied, her voice shaking, but her conviction clear. Grant Harrington, the businessman from Chicago, stood up from his table and approached the confrontation directly. "Officers, I'm Grant Harrington, and I've been traveling through this airport for years," he announced clearly. "I'm recording this interaction for my own protection and for the protection of this gentleman who's being harassed. I want to state for the record that I've seen no behavior from him that would justify this treatment, and I've seen behavior from your staff that clearly constitutes discrimination." Derek Langston found himself facing a growing coalition of passengers who refused to accept his authority without question. His training had prepared him for uncooperative individuals, but not for situations where multiple credible witnesses were actively documenting and challenging discriminatory behavior. "Sir, I need all passengers to step back and allow security personnel to handle this situation," Derek announced, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "We are handling this situation," Dr. Kensington replied firmly. "We're ensuring that discrimination doesn't go unchallenged just because it happens in an airport terminal." Victoria Sinclair realized that the confrontation had moved far beyond anything that could be resolved quietly or without significant consequences. Multiple passengers were recording. Social media was already amplifying the incident, and her staff was making statements that could not be defended legally or professionally. "Everyone, please calm down," Victoria attempted, though her words carried the hollow authority of someone trying to control a situation that had already moved beyond her influence. "We can resolve this through proper channels." "The proper channel," Kendrick said, standing slowly from his chair, "was for your staff to treat me with the same respect they show every other paying passenger. That opportunity has passed." Kendrick pulled out his phone and began typing a text message. Sawyer Montgomery zoomed in with his camera, trying to capture what Kendrick was writing, while his live stream audience demanded updates and information. "Guys, he's texting someone," Sawyer narrated for his viewers. "I don't know who, but something about his body language suggests that whatever happens next is going to change this whole situation." Kendrick finished typing his message to Captain Donovan Hayes. "Bring the jet to gate B47, full arrival protocol. Make it impressive." Then Kendrick typed a second message to his assistant, Ariana Reyes. "Alert Victor Caldwell immediately. Tell him Kendrick Vale has been discriminated against by his staff at Denver International. Tell him I'm about to make this very public, and he has approximately minutes to decide how Skylink Airlines wants to respond." Kendrick looked up from his phone and addressed the circle of airport staff and passengers surrounding him. "I want everyone here to understand that what happens in the next few minutes will be remembered for a very long time. Not just by me, but by the thousands of people who are watching this situation develop in real time." Serena Vargas, perhaps sensing that her aggressive approach was not yielding the results she expected, made one final attempt to assert her authority through intimidation. "Sir, you have exactly seconds to gather your belongings and leave this terminal, or you will be arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Kendrick looked at Serena with something approaching pity. "Miss Vargas, in exactly minutes you're going to understand the magnitude of the mistake you've made, and in exactly minutes you're going to be looking for a new job." Derek Langston stepped forward, apparently emboldened by Serena's ultimatum. "Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing and failure to comply with security directives." Officer Javier Morales quickly intervened. "Langston, we don't have grounds for arrest. He's shown valid identification. He has a legitimate ticket, and he hasn't violated any actual policies. Javier, he's refusing to comply with security screening. What screening? Asking someone to leave based on their appearance isn't security screening. It's discrimination. The confrontation between the two officers revealed the fracture lines within airport security between those who understood legitimate law enforcement and those who confused prejudice with procedure. Kendrick remained standing beside his chair, calm and patient, while around him the situation continued to escalate. He checked his phone and saw a response from Captain Donovan Hayes. ETA soon. This should be interesting. Sawyer Montgomery was struggling to narrate the developing situation for his live stream audience, which had grown dramatically as major news outlets and social media influencers began sharing his stream. "I don't know what's about to happen," Sawyer told his camera. But something is definitely about to happen. The energy here has completely changed, and this man, I still don't know his name, seems like he's waiting for something specific. The answer to Sawyer's question was approaching Denver International Airport, carrying a crew that was about to transform the entire dynamic of the confrontation and reveal to everyone present exactly who they had been discriminating against. Kendrick Vale checked his watch one more time. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The thunderous roar of twin Rolls-Royce engines filled Terminal B as the sleek Bombardier Global 7500 taxied toward Gate B-47, its pristine white fuselage gleaming under the airport's floodlights. Along the aircraft's side, in elegant blue lettering, the words Vale Global Logistics were clearly visible to everyone pressed against the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows. Sawyer Montgomery struggled to hold his phone steady as he captured the aircraft's approach for his live stream audience, which had exploded as news outlets and social media influencers shared the stream across platforms. "Holy, guys, it's real," Sawyer whispered into his camera, his voice shaking with the adrenaline of witnessing something unprecedented. "That's actually his private jet. Everything he said was true. These airport employees just spent an hour discriminating against the CEO of a billion-dollar company." The live stream comments had become a torrent of vindication and legal speculation. "Holy crap, it's real. These employees are so fired. I can't wait to see their faces. Someone get this to every news station. This is the most expensive discrimination ever. Get their names for the lawsuit. Justice is served." Serena Vargas stood frozen beside the window, watching the approach of an aircraft that represented the complete destruction of every assumption she had made about Kendrick Vale. Her face had gone ashen as the reality of her situation began to register. She had spent an hour publicly discriminating against someone who could end her career with a single phone call. Derek Langston backed away from the window. His earlier authority completely evaporated. He can't actually. "Oh, he can," said Dr. Abigail Kensington, still recording everything with her phone. "And he did. And you did exactly what he said you did. You discriminated against a passenger based on his appearance, and now the whole world is watching the consequences." The aircraft completed its taxi and came to a stop at Gate B-47. Its engines wound down with the kind of mechanical precision that spoke of maintenance budgets larger than most people's annual salaries. Ground crew members rushed to position the jetway. Their movements suggested they were accustomed to serving this particular aircraft and its passengers. Kendrick Vale pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. His first message went to Victor Caldwell, Skylink Airlines Regional Director. "Victor, this is Kendrick Vale. Turn on the live stream from Denver International Gate B-47. We need to discuss our contract immediately." His second message went to his attorney, Evelyn Harrington, a partner at one of Atlanta's premier civil rights law firms. Evelyn, I'm sending you video documentation of deliberate discrimination at Denver International. Clear your afternoon schedule. His third message went to Ariana Reyes. Ariana, prepare press releases for all major outlets. Title: Vale Global Logistics CEO discriminated against at Denver International Airport. Include video links and legal contact information. Victoria Sinclair approached Kendrick with the desperate urgency of someone watching her career disintegrate in real time. Mr. Vale, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this situation through appropriate channels. Kendrick looked at Victoria with the calm steadiness that had carried him through an hour of deliberate humiliation. Miss Sinclair, there was no misunderstanding. Your staff discriminated against me intentionally and deliberately. They refused to accept my legitimate ticket, questioned my right to access spaces I'd paid for, and treated me like a criminal based solely on my appearance. The jetway extended to meet Kendrick's aircraft, and Captain Donovan Hayes appeared at the aircraft door. He stepped into the terminal wearing his crisp uniform and immediately assessed the crowd of people surrounding his passenger. Good afternoon, Mr. Vale, Captain Donovan Hayes said with military precision. I trust your day in Denver was productive. Kendrick smiled for the first time in over an hour. Very educational, Captain. Extremely educational. Captain Donovan Hayes surveyed the crowd of airport staff, passengers, and recording devices surrounding Kendrick. I see we have an audience for departure. Should I prepare for additional passengers, or will you be traveling alone? Just me, Captain. Though I suspect some of these folks will have plenty to discuss after we leave. Sawyer Montgomery zoomed in with his phone to capture the interaction between Kendrick and his pilot, understanding that he was documenting a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media and news outlets. Guys, his actual pilot just walked off his actual private jet, Sawyer narrated for his audience. This is really happening. The man they tried to kick out of the terminal literally owns a jet that's probably worth more than most of these employees will earn in their entire careers. Natalia Rivera approached Kendrick with obvious respect and genuine remorse. Mr. Vale, I want you to know that not all Skylink employees agree with how you were treated. What happened here was wrong, and I documented everything for the official incident report. Kendrick looked at Natalia with appreciation. Miss Rivera, I noticed your attempts to intervene on my behalf. That kind of integrity is rare, and it won't be forgotten when the situation is resolved. Natalia felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Standing up to Serena Vargas had felt like career suicide, but Kendrick's acknowledgement suggested that doing the right thing might actually protect her position rather than threaten it. Serena Vargas approached Kendrick with the desperate energy of someone attempting damage control for a situation that had already moved far beyond control. Mr. Vale, I want to apologize if my security procedures seemed overly aggressive. I was just trying to maintain standards for our premium passengers. Kendrick studied Serena with the analytical attention he brought to business negotiations, where billions of dollars hung on the ability to read people accurately. Miss Vargas, you told me I didn't belong here. You said people like me don't access premium terminals. You confiscated my boarding pass and called security to have me removed. Those weren't security procedures. Those were choices based on your assumptions about who deserves respect in spaces they've paid to access. Serena's voice cracked as she realized that her own words were being used as evidence against her. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said, Kendrick interrupted. And now you're experiencing the consequences of those choices. Kendrick's phone rang, and he answered it on speaker, so everyone present could hear the conversation. Kendrick, this is Victor Caldwell from Skylink Airlines, came the voice of the regional director. I just watched the live stream of what happened at our Denver facility. I am personally mortified by the treatment you received from our staff." The crowd fell silent as they realized they were listening to a conversation between the discriminated passenger and a senior executive of the airline responsible for the discrimination. "Victor, I appreciate your call," Kendrick replied, "but this situation requires more than apologies. Your staff spent an hour deliberately discriminating against me based on my race and appearance. They questioned my right to access services I had paid for. They threatened me with arrest for sitting in a chair I had legitimate tickets to access. Kendrick, I understand completely. Effective immediately, I'm terminating the employment of everyone involved in this incident. Serena Vargas, Derek Langston, and anyone else who participated in discriminating against you will be removed from our payroll today." The words hit Serena and Derek like physical blows. Serena's legs gave out and she sank into the nearest chair, understanding that her career with Skylink Airlines had just ended in the most public way possible. Derek Langston attempted one final defense. "Mr. Caldwell, we were following security protocols. We couldn't have known." "Officer Langston, there are no security protocols that justify racial profiling." Victor Caldwell's voice carried clearly through the phone speaker. "There are no procedures that allow our staff to discriminate against passengers based on appearance. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." Sawyer Montgomery captured every moment of the terminations for his live stream audience, which had grown dramatically as major news outlets began incorporating his footage into breaking news coverage. "This is unprecedented," Sawyer told his camera. "We just witnessed live terminations of airport employees for discrimination. The airline executives are firing people in real time to try to contain the damage from this incident." Kendrick addressed the crowd that had gathered to witness the confrontation and its resolution. His voice carried clearly across the terminal, reaching not just those present, but the thousands watching via live stream. "I want everyone here to understand something important," Kendrick began. "I'm not satisfied because these employees lost their jobs. I'm not happy because my company's contracts give me power over their careers. What matters is that discrimination was challenged, documented, and addressed." He gestured toward Sawyer Montgomery, who was still recording. "This young man's live stream reached tens of thousands of people who witnessed deliberate bias in action. Dr. Kensington, Miss Rivera, Mr. Harrington, and others refused to remain silent while injustice occurred in front of them. That's how change happens, when people refuse to let discrimination go unchallenged." Dr. Abigail Kensington stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Mr. Vale, what you demonstrated today was remarkable dignity under pressure. You maintained your composure while being deliberately mistreated, and you used that mistreatment to educate everyone watching about the reality of discrimination." Grant Harrington, the businessman from Chicago, approached Kendrick with obvious respect. "Sir, I've traveled through airports for years, and I've seen this kind of treatment before, but I've never seen someone handle it with such strategic grace. You turned their prejudice into a teaching moment for everyone present." Kendrick looked around the terminal at the faces of passengers who had witnessed the confrontation and resolution. Some looked ashamed of their earlier silence. Others appeared energized by seeing discrimination directly challenged. A few seemed uncomfortable with having their own assumptions about privilege and prejudice so thoroughly exposed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kendrick announced, "this situation was resolved today because it was witnessed and documented. But discrimination happens every day in airports, hotels, restaurants, and offices across this country when no one is recording, when no one speaks up, when the person being discriminated against doesn't have a private jet to prove their worth." Kendrick turned toward his waiting aircraft. "Captain Donovan Hayes, I think we're ready for departure." As Kendrick walked toward the jetway, Sawyer Montgomery followed with his phone. still live streaming for an audience that had grown dramatically. "Mr. Vale," Sawyer called out, "do you have any final words for the people watching this stream?" Kendrick paused at the aircraft door and looked back toward the camera. "Dignity isn't determined by what you own or where you work or how you dress. Dignity is determined by how you treat other people and how you respond when your own dignity is challenged. Everyone deserves respect. Everyone belongs in spaces they've paid to access. And everyone has the responsibility to speak up when they witness injustice." Kendrick Vale stepped aboard his private jet, leaving behind a terminal full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, the story of what happened at Denver International Airport was already spreading across social media, news outlets, and conversations that would continue long after the last passenger had departed. The lesson would echo far beyond Terminal B. Assumptions have consequences. Discrimination has a cost. And sometimes justice arrives with the thunderous authority of truth that refuses to be silenced. As the Bombardier Global 7500 climbed into the Colorado sky above Denver International Airport, Kendrick Vale settled into his leather seat and allowed himself to process the emotional weight of what had just occurred. Through the aircraft's windows, he could see the terminal growing smaller below, but the impact of the past hours would grow larger with each passing day. Kendrick pulled out his phone and saw dozens of notifications, messages from business partners who had seen the live stream, news outlets requesting interviews, and civil rights organizations offering support for any legal action he might pursue. But the message that caught his attention first was from his father's former business partner, Kenneth Chen, who had watched Sawyer Montgomery's live stream from his retirement home in Florida. "Kendrick, your father would have been incredibly proud of how you handled yourself today. You turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson about dignity that millions of people will never forget. That's exactly the kind of leadership Reginald raised you to demonstrate." Kendrick felt tears forming in his eyes as he thought about his father, who had built Vale Global Logistics from a single delivery truck, but had never lived to see his son use the company's success to challenge injustice on such a public stage. The Denver Marathon medal still hung around his neck, a reminder that endurance applies to more than just athletic challenges. Hours later, Kendrick Vale's jet landed at his home base in Atlanta, where Ariana Reyes was waiting with a stack of interview requests and legal documents. The story had exploded across traditional media, with every major news outlet leading their broadcasts with footage from Sawyer Montgomery's live stream. "Mr. Vale," Ariana reported, "we've received interview requests from major networks. Civil rights organizations want to use your story as an example of how to respond to discrimination with dignity, and several law firms have offered to represent you pro bono if you decide to pursue legal action." Over the following days, Kendrick Vale's story became a case study in how individual acts of courage could spark broader conversations about justice and dignity. Sawyer Montgomery's live stream was downloaded millions of times and used in diversity training programs across the country. The incident prompted federal reviews of airport security procedures and airline customer service protocols. Kendrick established the Vale Dignity Foundation, using millions of his personal wealth to fund programs that taught people how to recognize and respond to discrimination. The foundation's first initiative was a partnership with airports and airlines to implement bias training that used real examples like the Denver incident to help employees understand the difference between security procedures and discriminatory assumptions. Months after the Denver incident, Kendrick returned to Denver International Airport for a speaking engagement about corporate leadership and social responsibility. The premium terminal had been renamed the Dignity Lounge, and staff members wore badges with the foundation's motto, "Respect is not earned by appearance, but guaranteed by humanity." Natalia Rivera had been promoted to customer service manager with specific responsibility for ensuring that all passengers received equal treatment, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. She met Kendrick at the airport entrance with a smile that carried genuine pride in the changes that had occurred. "Mr. Vale, we've implemented everything you recommended. Bias training is now mandatory for all customer-facing employees. We have independent review boards for discrimination complaints, and we've established partnerships with civil rights organizations to monitor our progress." As Kendrick prepared to board his commercial flight, he had specifically chosen to fly Skylink Airlines again to demonstrate that change was possible. He reflected on the lesson that had emerged from that difficult afternoon in Denver. Dignity cannot be measured by designer clothes or bank accounts or job titles. It cannot be earned through achievement or lost through discrimination. Dignity is the birthright of every human being, and it requires only one thing to be maintained: the courage to stand up for it when it is threatened. The person you dismissed today might be the person with the power to change your tomorrow, not because of revenge, but because justice, once awakened, tends to keep moving until it reaches everyone who needs it. Sometimes courage looks like a man in running shorts refusing to be moved from a chair he had every right to occupy. Sometimes change begins with someone saying, "I belong here," and meaning it deeply enough to make it true for everyone who comes after. If this story moved you, remember that dignity is not determined by dress codes or bank accounts or job titles. Your worth is not up for debate, and respect should not be conditional on appearance. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their dignity matters, because every day in spaces across this country, people are fighting for the simple right to be treated with respect. If you believe everyone deserves dignity, regardless of how they look or what they wear, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story because it's not just about one man's experience. It's about creating a world where no one has to prove they belong in spaces they've paid to access. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories of justice, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. Because the next story we tell might be yours, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage to stand up when it matters most. Remember, dignity is not negotiable, respect is not conditional, and justice belongs to everyone. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the change this world desperately needs.